Now that you've gotten through the data analysis phase, let's talk about feature engineering. This is one of the most understated parts of MLOps, and to be honest, I'm not completely sure why. Because when you get to the point where you're doing feature engineering, you're preparing your data set for what you'll actually use to train your model. So this is where you take all of your notes from your data analysis and you look at your business problem and you decide how you want to mold your data to fit your model. So, with that being said, in MLOps, sometimes this can be understated because you might need more opinions from subject matter experts depending on what area this model or this data is in. Like for healthcare, for example, you might need a doctor or someone familiar with the images you receive for your data set to be able to tell you kind of what things mean, basically. But usually, when you're working with relational data, you'll be able to try and automate a part of this process. So again, this is where you take your data analysis notes and you take your business problem and you compare the two and you decide what values in all of the data that you've compiled are going to be the most beneficial to solving your particular problem. So what features will you use from this data to actually train your model? And you, of course, want to be pretty selective here because this is where you start to get into some of those resource intensive areas. So the more features you have, the longer it's going to take to train a model. And the less features you have, of course, it's faster to train a model, but you might not get the same level of accuracy. So there is a little bit of a balance and there's some trade-off when you're going through this feature engineering process. And again, just like everything else with machine learning, this step is very unique to every project and every data set. So we'll go over some of the common things that you might do with feature engineering, but whatever applies to your particular project is, well, special because every project is special, every data set is different, and every set of business requirements is definitely different. There are several things you can do when you're going through this feature engineering stage, and that includes things like maybe you do some type of normalization of your data. You want specific values to fall within a certain range, or you do some scaling to your data to handle that, or you want to take totals from your data and use those as features, or you need some kind of complex ratios between relationships in your data, and that's what you use for a feature. So, for example, you might decide that there's some relationship between the number of orders for a product made in a specific month. So you might look through your customer data and figure out the total number of orders for a product during a certain month. And maybe that's a feature. So you can get really advanced and as fancy as you want with your feature engineering, as long as it makes sense for your business problem. So there are a few different techniques you can use for feature engineering, and the first one is feature selection. So this is when you look at your data and you basically take a subset of that data that you've seen is particularly pertinent for your model. So that might mean you've decided to filter out a lot of data and just choose a few columns that are related to each other across several databases. And that's okay. It's okay to trim the data away at this point. So the next thing you might try is feature extraction. And feature extraction is similar to feature selection, except with extraction, you'll take features and usually do some kind of combination to those features and delete the original ones. So this is actually getting rid of data or getting rid of features as you go through your process. And then finally, there's feature construction. And feature construction is when you take multiple features and you combine them in a meaningful way. So, kind of like we talked about earlier with figuring out the number of products that are ordered in a specific month. So, or the number of times a product is ordered in a specific month. And that's when you would go through maybe a customers table, an orders table, and a product table, and you combine all of that data into this one meaningful feature, but you don't get rid of the other data that's already there. And of course, since we're talking about this from an MLOps point of view, there are a number of tools to help with this process and add some automation and speed it up a little bit. So first you have feature tools, then there's AutoFeat, and then there's feature selector. So these are some open source tools. I think some of them have a few paid options, but these will go through your data and based on some type of parameters you give it, it will automatically make your features for you. And as you start to add more automation to your MLOps process, this is going to really help speed up the whole data part of your MLOps pipeline. So let's take a quick look at an example of feature engineering with feature tools in a little Python script. So I'll switch over to VS Code. And you should be able to see this featureeng.py file. And what's happening in here is we're going ahead and doing our feature engineering using feature tools. So the first thing you'll see is that we've imported some data. We've done some kind of transformations to it, and we've made it into a data frame with pandas. And now we're taking advantage of feature tools functionality to start automating this process of taking the raw data and converting it to our features. So there's two really important concepts that you need to know for feature tools, and I highly suggest you go check out their documentation to get a really in-depth dive on it. But the first thing you need to know is what an entity set is. And an entity set is basically a collection of data frames. So as you can see, we have several different data frames in here, and this might represent different tables in a database. So we know that these three tables have some kind of data relation that we want to merge into maybe one feature or a set of features. So we've made that entity set, and then we come down here, and this is where feature tools DFS or deep feature synthesis functionality comes in, and it lets us take our entity set, and remember that's a collection of a lot of different tables or data sources, and then it lets us decide how we want to handle creating those features. So we can target which specific columns and data values we want from those tables and how they're related. We can decide to add certain transformations to the data. We can get these aggregates, so figuring out the last max and min, and that's a part of our feature set now. So this is how you can speed up feature engineering, because once you have a script like this written and you know what data you're expecting, you can just run a script like this, and at the end you get your new feature set, and it's another data frame, and you can convert it to any type that you need to export, whether it's CSV or JSON or some other format.